and welcome back. I'm Nicole, a cottage witch, and it is April 30th as I'm filming here and snowing. It's snowing again on April 30th. It's gonna snow tomorrow on May 1st because I live on the Canadian prairies. But seriously, why do I live here? I need to find somebody who will pay me to live someplace that will not snow in May, because oh my god, I'm tired. Anyway, enough of my whining about the weather. To cheer myself up, I'm going to talk about books today in a, change of pace. The first books I'm going to mention, I'm not going to go in depth about because I did a video, I can't remember when, at the beginning of the month of April, I think, maybe, about the Witch Sisters deck study and the books I was reading in that. So if you want more detail about my stack of books is falling over these books, you can check that out. A couple of the audiobooks I listened to were The Celtic World and Celtic Mythology. They're both great courses books. At least The Celtic World is. I think Celtic Mythology is too. And they're really nice overviews. They're on Audible. So it was easy to listen to while I was like getting some work done or cleaning or whatever. Then I read this one, Scottish Myths and Legends, which also is on Audible, and I tabbed a few of my favorite stories because some of them are really good. They're fun. They're like folk tales, fairy tales, sometimes myths with gods and things, but Celtic, which you don't usually hear very often, which is a travesty because these are super fun. I'm gonna get the Irish book, which actually might arrive tonight, and I'm very excited. I also read a book called Early Irish Myths and Sagas. Some of them were the same as stories in here, and I can't for the life of me remember where I put that book because it's only just possible I have too many books. Oh, wait. Hold on, I found it. This one. I read this one. So this one is, I wrote down something here. So the Audible book, Celtic Mythology, has a lot of these in them. It doesn't have the dreams of Angus, or the labor pains of Ulid, or the twins of Macha. However, I think the twins of Macha is in one of my Morgan books, which I'll get to in a second. But everything else, I think, yeah, is in Celtic Mythology as well. So if you prefer to listen to them. And it's different, like, obviously if they're originally in Old Irish, this is translated by, I can't remember who, Jeffrey Gans. Sure. Cool. It was fun. Aside from, colonialism, I don't really know why they're not as popular as Greek or Norse myths, because they're every bit as good. And just a lot of fun to get to know. So then I read Visions of the Cailleach, because I love the figure of the Cailleach. She's phenomenal and endlessly fascinating. And so this book, it's a little like a Pagan Portals book, but it's divided into, so it's got some about origins, or potential origins. There's more, I think, speculation in here than there is in Pagan Portals, but it's still got a lot of really good stuff, and it's got some also, a section on the malevolent Cailleach, which is mostly influenced by Christianity's view of anything they couldn't sanctify, they demonized, basically. So, cheery, Catholic Church type activities. And then I read The Morgan, Meeting the Great Queens by Morgan Daimler. And also I listened to another Morgan book, also called The Morgan by Courtney Weber on Audible. And they're pretty similar. Courtney Weber's one I think is more to do with modern practice, whereas this has more of the old stories. It does have a section on the modern world at the end, but everything else is more about the modern, the older stories. And I think that Macha story about giving birth is in here. But yeah, it's a really cool book. she's a fascinating figure. And I like a good crow, or raven, or both. What else? I think that's everything for that sort of like mythology type section. Although, if we're talking modern myths, Neil Gaiman is always good. So I read The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which is like a sort of myth, just a modern one. It's really beautiful. I mean, his books are always sort of oddly beautiful. And they're fantasy, but they're so real. And yeah, it's a beautiful story. Don't really know how to talk about it without giving things away, but it's a cool book. I like it. I have a few more books of his I've got to read one of these days. Okay, what next? Next, I talked in, related. In the other reading wrap-up that I did, where I talked about the classics I've read, mostly listened to, I forgot to mention that before I started Ulysses, I also listened to a couple other books on Audible that were A Portrait of the Artist as Young Man, which is read by Colin Farrell, and Dubliners, which is read by Andrew Scott. And they're both fantastic. I mean, the books are gorgeous. The narration is also excellent in both cases. And they were a lot of fun to listen to. Just so beautiful. And I will listen to them again sometime. Both of those, I think. Really enjoyed that. And so, related to my Ulysses adventure, because it's going to take me months to get through it, like literal months, because I'm going very slowly, and listening along to a podcast as I go that sort of explains everything. But there's a lot in Ulysses. It references so many things in like Western literature, in mythology, both Greek and Celtic, and probably Norse and others at some point, I don't know. There's a lot of Irish history, there's a lot of Catholic and Jewish ideas, which I know a little bit about growing up in a fundamentalist community. So the Bible I've read a few times, so some of those references I get. The Irish history is mostly lost on me. But there's also a lot of poetry, I guess that goes in sort of with Western literature, and philosophy. There's a lot of philosophy, and a lot of what the Catholic Church would call heresy, and did call heresy. And for a long time, bookstores in Ireland didn't even have to ban it because none of them would bother stocking it because it was so blasphemous. Which, of course, just makes me want to read it, because anytime an institution like the church tells me I can't do something, I'm like, oh, really? Okay, I'll go do that then. So, in that spirit, I read The Secret Teachings of Jesus. I actually found an audiobook where there was a couple more. So this one has The Secret Book of James, The Gospel of Thomas, The Book of Thomas, and The Secret Book of John. And there's also a Gospel of Mary and a Gospel of... oh, I can't remember the other one now. Totally blanking. Oh, well. They're kind of interesting to read. They're from the... what's it called? Those scrolls that were... it doesn't say. Oh, yeah. Nag Hammadi texts. So not all of the scrolls were recovered in their entirety. They're missing, words sometimes here and there. So sometimes there'll just be weird gaps in some of the Gospels. These ones I think are more complete than the Book of Mary is a bit gappy. And there was another one that had some gaps in it. But it's really interesting. Like, it's... if you've read the New Testament, there's a lot of stuff that's similar. So, like, these books could have been included in some ways, but there are some things in here that are that the Catholic Church, at least, and the Western Protestant churches would very much not like. So it was really interesting to read and just get an idea of things that weren't included at the Council of Nicene or something like that, when they decided which books went in the Bible. I don't know if all of these books were known to them at that time. But there were definitely some books that didn't make it into the Bible, as at least the version that I'm familiar with. So this was pretty interesting. And then I read, so I got this book, Philosophy Bites Back, because I thought it seemed like a fun introduction because it's in this interview format. And then I realized it's a podcast. So I listened to the podcast. So I listened to all of the ones that are in here, and then a bunch of others. And probably I'll keep going and listening to more because it's fascinating. These two people who do the podcast, I can't remember their names. These guys, David Edmonds and Nigel Wolverton, they do a fantastic job, and they get really interesting people on who believe or study a whole variety of different ideas. And so it's just pretty cool to learn about all these different things. And, you know, some of these figures, if you read any Western literature, like, you hear about them, but that doesn't mean you know what they argued for, or what their beliefs were, or how they viewed the world. You just sort of guess from what other people say about them. So then, you know, hearing people talk about Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, the Prince had actually read Montaigne, Descartes, and so on, like all these names that I'd heard of, but didn't really know so much about. David Hume I want to read more of. He was really interesting. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Which is not to say I remember everything about what I listened to about all these people, because my memory is just maddening. But it's a pretty cool book. If they've got a bunch of these, they've got one, I think that they've got 3 of them now, and they've got one focused mostly on women, but they, I can't find anything else about it. Anyway, it is a podcast, which is super fun to listen to, so check that out. I'll link that below. Okay, and then I listened to, so the library I finally listened to the library audiobook of The Botany of Desire, A Plant's Life View of the World, which focuses on 4 different plants: the apple, the tulip, cannabis, and potato. Well, marijuana and then the potato. And it was really fascinating. I mean, I do like Michael Pollan. I've read 2 or 3 other of his books, and I've enjoyed all of them. So I do like his writing. I find it really interesting. And then, of course, as I was finishing this book, I went to the store and got apples, tulips, and a potato. And also, I've just started trying CBD oil for muscle tension and spasms issues. So we'll see how that's going. Like, just started. But it's so fascinating. Then the history of some of these plants and how they came to be what we know them today and what they used to be historically. It's so cool. And I'm a geek. So if you're also a geek and like plants, this is a super fun book. Okay. The last selection of books that I've got are all books about books, sorta. Well, this one's tangentially about books. This is The Bilingual Brain by Albert Costa. It's very sciencey, like academic sciencey. So it might not be for everybody. But he does talk about a lot. I mean, it's mostly about the research into the brain. And I'm not sure, on reading it, I'm not sure I know anything more definitively at the end than I did at the beginning, because the brain is so weird and we still don't know as much as anybody would like to. So the final outcome was sort of like, it could be this, or it could be that, or it could be something else altogether. So it's interesting, kinda. It's not quite what I thought it would be. I'm not sure the style is informal. I'm not sure I'd say that. I'd say it's more academic than that, but that's me. But it was interesting to read. And I'm trying, and not always succeeding, to learn French and kind of Arabic. So if you have any interest in learning other languages, this is kind of, I don't know, it's interesting. I'm not sure it's astonishing or revelatory. It's brains are weird, is the bottom line. Brains are weird, and there's a lot we still don't know about them. So, then I read some other books. Okay, what first? I don't know. I got this Francine Prose Reading Like a Writer. I probably won't keep it. I got it at a Free Little Library, so it'll probably go back in a Free Little Library. Because, yeah, it was alright. It was interesting. It wasn't breathtaking. She's got a few authors that she really, really likes and quotes from repeatedly. And it's just basically different sections of how to write different types of things, which, I don't know. I don't feel like it was really about reading like a writer. It was more like a how to write book, which is okay. Books to be read immediately, 267. So she's got, you know, a list, but it is mostly the classics. And as other people have pointed out, it is mostly white men, which, you know, is a lot of what I'm reading at the moment, so I don't dislike them, but that is one of the limitations. And there are a few authors that she really, really likes and talks about over and over again, so if you happen to really not like those, that would be a bit annoying. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm sort of, like, glad I read it once. Would I read it again? No. This one, though, I did read for a second time. This is Reading Lolita in Tehran, a memoir and books by Zora Nafisi. I love this book. She is an English teacher, I think in DC now. Does it have a, yeah. No, where's John Hopkins University? I have no idea. I'm not American. Oh, yeah, she lives in Washington, DC. She used to teach in a couple universities in Tehran, and was eventually expelled for not wearing the veil, and then went and taught at a different university, I think, wearing the veil, and then eventually it got to the point where she couldn't teach what she wanted without risking too much, because of censorship and everything, and the crackdown on women, and so she left. She's got a couple other memoirs that come after this, which are really interesting too. And it's a fascinating, I mean, okay, caveat. Like this book, it also focuses mostly on a handful of dead white men who wrote Western literature, because that's what she teaches, is Western, European and English mostly, or Western European literature. And I don't always like the authors that she talks about, like Henry James. I tried again recently. I don't know. I'm not convinced, despite the fact she loves him. It's not working for me. However, I do like reading about the Middle East. I've got a ton of books, both about the Middle East and by novelists from the Middle East. And so reading a book about a woman who teaches literature in Iran is just so fascinating to me. And how she had, at one time, she had like seminar style classes in her home because it was really the only safe way they could talk about these books they wanted to talk about. Yeah, it's a pretty cool book. She's had an interesting life. She does talk a lot about the same few writers, but she talks about them in such an interesting way that I kind of don't mind, and it makes me want to try them again. So Lolita, Gatsby, Henry James, Austen are the main ones. So Lolita I love. I may reread that one of these days. Gatsby, couldn't stand. That sort of jazz era is just not for me. I don't know. It does not appeal to me even a little bit. So, you know, if that's for you, knock yourself out. Henry James, Jane Austen. Also, apologies to all the Jane Austen lovers out there. I can't get into her. I can't. If there was ever going to be a Jane Austen book for me, it would be Northanger Abbey. Is that what it's called? Northanger Abbey? Because it's like a satire of a gothic romance. And even that one, I was like, yeah, I get what it's doing, but no. I can't get into her books. But despite that, this book is really fun to read because she's so passionate about it, and her students are so passionate about it, and some of them risk quite a lot just to be able to read and talk about the books that they read. And it's really incredible. And I don't know, there's something about the way she talks about books that I just enjoy. She's got a couple other books since this that are also very good. So that was that. Then I read a couple of these essay books. So Days of Reading by Marcel Proust. This one I'm not convinced by. Also, it's got a couple weird printing, like, what happened there? I don't know. But it's got a couple of those in here. Anyway, it's not bad. It's just not for me. And also, okay, funny thing. He talks about the French author Théophile Gautier, who I haven't read. But the way he talks about him as somebody who's a bit sort of, I don't know, dull might not be quite the right word, but tends to go on and on with only occasional insights, is honestly sort of how I feel about Proust. So, you know, don't tell him I said that. But yeah, I don't know. He's one of these authors that, like, I'm glad I've read, but I don't feel the need to reread at any point. I'm glad I read because he's influenced other writers who've come since then. But, oh man, he does go on and on and on and on at length. And it's such a little book, and he manages to just go on. Anyway, Orwell, on the other hand, I could listen to go on for ages. There are a few essays in here. Why I Write is just one of them. The Lion and the Unicorn is a fantastic political essay. So sometimes I see on Instagram people arguing about Orwell's politics. Was he communist? Was he right-wing? Was he... Basically, the verdict is he was anti-authoritarian. He didn't like either. He was a democratic socialist. And A Lion and the Unicorn really lays that out explicitly, that he is a democratic socialist was. But all of the dangers of authoritarianism are the things that he talks about in that. And so if you've read 1984 or Animal Farm, it's really interesting to read this, which is more explicitly about his personal political views. Politics in the English language was also pretty good. And Why I Write was... I actually found an audiobook version of that I listened to twice. Because it's so good. He's so good. Politics in the English language has sort of more like writing tips, good bits of writing, excessively bad bits of writing, and why he thinks they're terrible. And then suggestions for how to write. And then Why I Write is just a short little thing that talks about what it means to him. And yeah, it's so good. He's such a good writer. I love him. I should read 1984 again sometime. It's been a long time. Actually, there's probably a version that's been translated into French that I could try and see if I can understand. That could be fun. Maybe I'll do that. Anyway, and this Lion and the Unicorn is mostly about England because he is English, and so he does talk about things that are, you know, stereotypically English. Yeah, so this was really, really good. I enjoyed that a lot. And then the last book I read is Translating Myself and Others by Jhumpa Lahiri. I brought another book of hers out because, in other words, because what she's done that's really interesting is she moved to Rome for a while, learned Italian, wrote in Italian, and then had somebody translate her writing into English, which is this book, which is about her experience of learning to write stories, and some of the stories in Italian. And then somebody else translated this. Anne Goldstein, a few years ago. When was this? 2016. And then this book, Translating Myself and Others, is about her experience of translating other people, because she also speaks, what other Indian language does she speak? Bengali or something? I can't remember. Anyway, she's translated that into English, And she's translated other people's Italian into English. And now she's translated some of her own Italian stories into English. And it's so fascinating. I really enjoyed this book. It was just such an interesting look at what language is and how we express ourselves differently in different languages, and how complicated that is. It's so messy. It's just like, you think Google Translate or like AI will be able to translate eventually, and maybe it will, but the subtleties of what people imply in language is really hard to translate, and trying to get the tone exactly right is really hard, and then it's even more awkward when you're translating your own work, because you can't really go around changing things, except she kind of did a couple of times. But there's another Italian author that she has translated into English. I can't remember his name. And she talked about that experience as well, as being one of those things that changes how you view writing and language. And so it's just, yeah, both of these books are actually super cool. And if you have any interest in other languages or books in translation, these are very good. So that finally sums up my April reading, which was a bit excessive this month, I do realize. I listened to a lot of audiobooks, and just didn't do much else, frankly, like TV, podcasts, that's other things that I usually do. I didn't do much of. It's mostly reading and listening to audiobooks. And with that, yes, I do feel much better about the day, despite the snow, although I'm still not happy about the snow. And hopefully by the time you see this, it will be gone forever for the summer. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.